America didn't just get more expensive after 2020, it got stranger. You can feel it in how time slips away, how money disappears faster than it should, how life feels busy but hollow at the same time. The old rules don't work anymore. Working harder doesn't lead to stability. Saving doesn't feel protective. Even success feels temporary. Official numbers insist this is a recovery, yet millions are quietly scaling back, opting out or burning out. That disconnect is the story. Something changed in the US economy that rewired daily life. Not overnight, but permanently. And the longer it goes unspoken, the heavier it becomes. What happened in 2020 is still being misunderstood, and that misunderstanding is why everything feels permanently off. This was not a normal recession. Recessions break demand, destroy jobs, then reset prices and behavior. What happened instead was a full system rewrite executed at emergency speed with consequences that were never rolled back. In a matter of months, the United States injected over $5 trillion into the economy through stimulus, loans, asset purchases, and emergency programs. Interest rates were driven to near zero. The Federal Reserve's balance sheet more than doubled, jumping from roughly $4 trillion to nearly $9 trillion. Debt became cheap, abundant, and encouraged at every level: government, corporations, and households. This wasn't stabilization. It was a structural shift in how the economy functions. Markets were no longer allowed to clear naturally. Prices were no longer allowed to fall where they should. Risk was muted, delayed, and redistributed. Asset prices surged while real-world affordability collapsed. The stock market recovered in months. Housing followed. Corporate profits exploded. But wages did not keep pace, and the cost of survival reset higher. That gap is the fracture people feel every day. This is why the word recovery feels dishonest. A recovery implies returning to something familiar. The post-2020 economy did not return. It replaced the old model. Money creation replaced productivity. Debt replaced growth. Liquidity replaced resilience. Once those incentives were locked in, they couldn't be undone without triggering collapse. So the system chose forward motion at any cost. Households were quietly pulled into this rewrite. Mortgage balances surged. Auto loans stretched to 84 and 96 months. Credit card balances climbed past $1 trillion. Survival was financialized. The economy stopped rewarding patience and started punishing restraint. Saving became irrational. Waiting became dangerous. Everything accelerated except security. This is where the emotional shift begins. When rules change but language doesn't, people feel disoriented. When effort no longer maps to outcomes, motivation decays. When stability depends on policies that must constantly escalate, trust erodes. The economy didn't just change numbers, it rewired incentives, behavior, and expectations. That rewrite explains why life feels unstable even when charts look strong. And once the foundation changes, every pressure that follows, prices, time, stress, trust, builds on that new reality. Once the system was rewritten, the next illusion was inevitable: the idea of recovery. On paper, the numbers looked convincing. GDP returned to trend. Equity markets added tens of trillions in value. Corporate earnings reached record margins. But real life operates downstream from policy, not inside spreadsheets. That is where the recovery broke down. The post-2020 economy recovered financial assets first, not households. Roughly 90% of stocks are owned by the top 10%, meaning most Americans never felt the market rebound at all. Meanwhile, prices reset permanently higher. Since 2020, cumulative inflation ran near 20%, but essentials moved far faster. Housing costs jumped roughly 40%, auto insurance surged 30 to 50%, groceries rose double digits, and healthcare premiums quietly repriced upward year after year. Recovery arrived as higher bills, not higher security. This is the direct consequence of the system rewrite that came before it. When liquidity is injected faster than productive capacity expands, prices don't normalize, they re-anchor. Once rent, insurance, and food reset upward, they don't fall back without deflation. And deflation was politically impossible. So the economy stabilized itself by transferring pressure to households. Wages technically rose, but context matters. Real wage growth flattened once inflation was accounted for. A nominal raise that trails survival costs is not progress, it's erosion. That's why paychecks felt larger while lifestyles shrank. People didn't feel poorer because they misunderstood economics. They felt poorer because purchasing power was silently extracted. This is also why strong consumer spending became a misleading signal. Spending held up not because households were healthy, but because they had no choice. Credit bridged the gap. Revolving balances expanded. Buy now, pay later normalized groceries and utilities. Consumption stopped being optional and became a requirement to maintain baseline living standards. The economy interpreted that as strength. Households experienced it as pressure. The recovery narrative survived by measuring the wrong things. It tracked velocity, not strain. It celebrated job counts, not job quality. It praised resilience while ignoring exhaustion. That disconnect is why official optimism began to feel insulting rather than reassuring. This gap between macro success and lived reality didn't create confusion by accident. It trained people to doubt their own experience. And once that doubt sets in, it becomes the emotional foundation for everything that follows. Stress, time distortion, digital escape, and the slow collapse of trust that now defines everyday life. The gap between recovery and reality didn't stay abstract for long. It hardened into something far more concrete, a cost of living shock that never reversed. Once prices reset upward, they stopped behaving like a temporary surge and started acting like a new floor. That permanence is what changed daily life. This shock wasn't about one category, it was synchronized. Housing absorbed the largest share of income first, with median rents rising hundreds of dollars per month in just a few years. A $1,200 rent quietly became $1,800. Property taxes and insurance followed, compounding the hit. Transportation piled on next. Average new car prices pushed past $48,000, while used car financing normalized interest rates above 9 to 11%. Ownership turned into a long-term liability instead of mobility. Food delivered the most relentless pressure because it never pauses. Grocery prices didn't just rise, they became unpredictable. Shrinkflation masked increases while total receipts climbed. Households weren't reacting to luxury inflation, they were adjusting to survival inflation. Even utilities followed the same pattern, with electricity and natural gas repriced upward through fuel surcharges and temporary adjustments that quietly became permanent. This is where the psychological shift accelerated. When every essential reprices simultaneously, budgeting stops being planning and turns into triage. Discretionary spending doesn't slowly decline, it collapses. Life becomes a series of defensive decisions. The economy still records activity, but the quality of that activity degrades. Spending exists, enjoyment disappears. What made this shock uniquely destabilizing was its duration. Inflation typically burns hot and cools. This one lingered just long enough to drain savings, then normalized at a higher baseline. Household cash buffers shrank. Emergency expenses became routine. A single unexpected bill could destabilize an entire month. That constant edge is not visible in GDP, but it rewires behavior. This pressure also explains why time began to feel compressed. When income is pre-allocated to essentials, there is no sense of forward motion. Months blur because nothing accumulates. No progress, no margin, no relief. The economy kept moving, but households were locked in place. By the time prices stabilized, the damage was already done. The shock didn't end because it didn't need to. It accomplished its function, forcing adaptation. And that adaptation, constant vigilance, reduced choice, and financial compression became the emotional baseline that defines life now. Once survival costs locked in, time itself began to warp. Not emotionally, economically. A debt-driven economy doesn't just extract money, it restructures how people experience days, months, and years. When the future is pre-sold to service obligations, the present stops feeling real. Household debt now sits above $17 trillion, with mortgages around $12 trillion. auto loans near $1.6 trillion, and credit card balances pushing past $1.3 trillion. That debt isn't abstract. It assigns future labor before it happens. Every paycheck arrives already spent, already allocated, already owed. When income is claimed in advance, time loses its forward momentum. There is motion, but no progress. This is why the months after 2020 blurred together. Not because people were distracted, but because nothing accumulated. No surplus, no margin, no psychological payoff. Economic systems reward memory through milestones. Savings goals reached, debt cleared, stability achieved. A debt-first economy removes those markers. Without milestones, the brain stops distinguishing one period from the next. Days collapse into maintenance cycles. Interest rates amplified this effect. As borrowing costs rose, the price of standing still increased. Variable expenses reset higher, while refinancing became impossible. Households weren't moving forward or backward. They were trapped in rollover mode. Payments extended, terms stretched. Auto loans normalized 72 to 96 months. Mortgages locked people in place. Time stopped being something you move through and became something you endure. This distortion is structural. A consumption economy powered by leverage depends on constant activity, not meaningful advancement. It doesn't require people to feel fulfilled, only compliant. Bills must be paid monthly. Subscriptions renew automatically. Minimum payments keep balances alive. The system doesn't want closure, it wants continuity. And continuity without resolution is what makes time feel endless and hollow. That sensation of lost years is not psychological weakness, it's economic compression. When income growth fails to outpace obligations, the future shrinks. Planning horizons shorten, risk tolerance disappears. People stop imagining 5-year outcomes and start thinking in billing cycles. Life narrows to 30-day increments. This is the hidden cost of debt-anchored stability. The economy appears active, yet human experience stagnates. And once time loses its shape, people look for escape, not necessarily from work, but from the structure that flattened their sense of reality. That search doesn't begin online by accident. It begins because time itself stopped behaving the way it used to. When time flattened and progress disappeared, the economy didn't slow down, it migrated. Activity moved off streets, offices, and physical spaces, and into platforms, apps, and algorithms. What replaced the physical economy wasn't just digital convenience. It was a system optimized for extraction, surveillance, and constant engagement. After 2020, income, consumption, and identity became screen-mediated. Work shifted into dashboards and task queues. Spending flowed through apps that never close. Even basic services, banking, healthcare access, insurance management, were pushed into digital portals. The economy stopped meeting people where they lived and instead pulled people into interfaces designed to monetize attention and behavior. This shift explains why economic participation began to feel invisible and exhausting at the same time. Digital systems remove friction, but they also remove closure. There is no end of the day in an app-based economy. Notifications replace schedules. Algorithms replace human pacing. Productivity becomes continuous rather than bounded, which stretches mental bandwidth without increasing fulfillment. Money itself became abstracted. Cash disappeared. Prices changed dynamically. Subscriptions multiplied quietly. A household could be paying $300 to $500 per month in recurring digital charges without ever making an intentional purchase. Spending stopped feeling like choice and started feeling like leakage. The economy remained active, but individuals lost awareness of where their money and energy were going. At the same time, pricing power moved upstream. Digital platforms introduced algorithmic price discrimination, different users seeing different prices based on behavior, urgency, and device data. Airlines, ride-hailing, food delivery, and insurance all adopted real-time optimization. The same service could cost more depending on when, where, and how it was accessed. This wasn't inflation. It was precision extraction. Digital economies don't operate on memory or milestones. They operate on flow. Engagement must never stop, because stopping breaks revenue models. That's why everything feels ongoing and unresolved. There is no finish line in a platform economy, only continued participation. Even leisure was absorbed. Vacations became content. Hobbies became side income. Rest became optimization. The line between earning and existing collapsed. When every action carries potential monetization, life loses weight. Moments stop anchoring memory because they are immediately converted into data or output. This transition didn't happen because people preferred it. It happened because the post-2020 economic structure required it. A debt-heavy, high-cost system needs constant throughput. Digital platforms provide that throughput efficiently, invisibly, and at scale. But efficiency for systems is not stability for humans. Once the economy stopped being a place you enter and exit and became something you are always inside, disconnection became inevitable. And that permanent immersion sets the stage for the next rupture, the growing sense of being watched, modeled, predicted, and managed, not by people but by systems that no longer need permission to operate. When the economy moved fully into platforms, a new sensation emerged alongside convenience: constant observation. Not paranoia, pattern recognition. Surveillance capitalism doesn't announce itself. It embeds quietly into transactions, interfaces, and daily habits until being tracked feels less like an event and more like an atmosphere. Data replaced labor as the most valuable input. Every click, pause, search, and purchase became signal. Major platforms generate the majority of their revenue not by selling products, but by selling prediction. Advertising alone surpassed $300 billion annually in the US, built almost entirely on behavioral modeling. The goal is no longer to respond to demand, but to anticipate and shape it. This is why the economy began to feel intrusive rather than transactional. Prices adjust in real time. Offers appear at moments of weakness or urgency. Insurance premiums change based on opaque scoring. Credit limits fluctuate without explanation. The same person can receive different outcomes on different days. The system isn't listening to words, it's modeling behavior patterns with probabilistic accuracy. This environment trains distrust. When outcomes feel predetermined, agency erodes. People don't feel marketed to, they feel managed. The economy stops feeling external and starts feeling internal, as if decisions are being nudged before they're consciously made. That sensation is new and deeply destabilizing. A platform economy cannot function without surveillance. Continuous engagement produces continuous data. Continuous data allows continuous optimization, and optimization favors revenue, not well-being. What looks like personalization is often extraction tuned to emotional state. Convenience becomes camouflage. The financial incentives are clear. Predictive targeting outperforms traditional advertising by multiples. Dynamic pricing increases margins without raising sticker prices universally. Risk scoring reduces exposure while increasing compliance. Surveillance isn't a side effect, it's the engine. And once installed, it cannot be removed without dismantling the model itself. This explains why so many people feel watched even when nothing explicit happens. It's not about devices recording conversations. It's about systems inferring intent faster than intuition can process. When outcomes align too closely with thought patterns, the line between coincidence and control blurs. That uncertainty alone creates stress. The deeper consequence is psychological. Surveillance collapses privacy not just spatially, but mentally. People self-censor. Behavior narrows, exploration declines. When actions are constantly evaluated, experimentation feels risky. The economy doesn't need to punish deviation. Prediction does that automatically. And this pressure feeds directly into the next breakdown. When an economy observes, predicts, and extracts without offering clarity or trust, belief erodes. Not selectively, universally. Once people feel managed rather than served, they stop believing explanations altogether. That loss of trust doesn't stay confined to platforms. It spreads outward, infecting institutions, narratives, and the idea of authority itself. When surveillance becomes ambient and economic outcomes feel pre-scripted, trust doesn't weaken gradually and it collapses suddenly. American institutions didn't lose credibility because people became irrational. They lost it because explanations stopped matching lived reality and the gap kept widening. Economic messaging insisted stability while households experienced compression. Strong labor markets coincided with declining purchasing power. Cooling inflation arrived after prices had already reset higher. Trillions were mobilized overnight to stabilize markets, while relief for daily life arrived slower, smaller, and conditional. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Confidence eroded not from cynicism, but from arithmetic. Trust depends on coherence. After 2020, coherence disappeared. Fiscal policy expanded deficits beyond $1.7 trillion annually, yet long-term plans were absent. Monetary policy shifted from emergency stimulus to aggressive tightening in record time, then backtracked under financial stress. Institutions didn't look adaptive, they looked reactive. And when systems appear reactive, authority feels performative. This breakdown was magnified by information saturation. Americans were exposed to constant official reassurance across screens that were already associated with behavioral manipulation. When economic narratives are delivered through the same channels that optimize engagement and persuasion, credibility suffers by association. Messaging felt engineered, not informative. People didn't stop listening because they rejected expertise. They stopped because they couldn't separate guidance from control. The financial architecture reinforced this skepticism. Banks were stabilized instantly. Markets were backstopped repeatedly. Meanwhile, households absorbed inflation, higher borrowing costs, and shrinking buffers. That asymmetry taught a quiet lesson. Institutions protect systems first and people second. Once learned, that lesson is permanent. Polls began reflecting this shift. Confidence in government, media, and financial institutions fell to historic lows. But polling understates the damage. The deeper issue wasn't distrust of specific organizations. It was distrust of explanation itself. Official narratives stopped functioning as reference points. People began triangulating reality instead of receiving it. This is why disbelief spread beyond economics. Once institutions lose credibility in one domain, skepticism bleeds into all others. If economic data feels disconnected, why trust forecasts? If policy reverses without accountability, why trust intent? Doubt becomes defensive, not ideological. Crucially, this collapse wasn't chaotic. It was rational under pressure. In a system that observes, predicts, and nudges behavior while failing to deliver stability, withholding belief becomes a form of self-protection. Trust is expensive. People stop spending it. The consequence is fragmentation. Without shared reference points, society doesn't debate. It diverges. Everyone builds their own model of reality from incomplete data. That fragmentation isn't accidental. It's the byproduct of an economy that optimizes compliance over clarity. And once trust disintegrates at the institutional level, the threat to the system is no longer recession or inflation. It's disengagement. Because a population that no longer believes explanations is far more dangerous than one that disagrees. That tension between a system that requires participation and a public that no longer trusts its motives is what makes reversal impossible and sets the stage for what comes next. By the time trust fractures, reversal is no longer an option. Systems can survive inflation, debt, even recession. What they cannot survive is mass disengagement. That is why nothing goes back. Because going back would require admitting that the structure built after 2020 cannot function without constant escalation. The post-2020 US economy is locked into forward motion. Federal debt now sits near $38 trillion, with annual interest costs pushing toward $1 trillion. That debt cannot be serviced through growth alone. It requires participation, steady spending, stable labor supply, and predictable compliance. Any broad pullback threatens the math itself. Reversal isn't postponed because it's inconvenient. It's postponed because it's destabilizing. This is why pressure never truly eases. Costs don't reset downward. Relief arrives temporarily, then disappears. Policy shifts buy time, not resolution. The system isn't designed to restore balance. It's designed to maintain throughput. As long as money circulates, as long as people work, borrow, spend, and renew, the structure holds. The moment large numbers stop engaging, cracks accelerate. That fear explains the constant normalization. High prices become the new normal. Long-term debt becomes financial planning. Side income becomes flexibility. Stress becomes resilience. The language evolves to prevent disengagement. The goal isn't prosperity, it's continuity. This also explains why simplification is quietly discouraged. When people downsize, delay, or opt out, they reduce velocity. A household that buys less, moves less, borrows less, and wants less is not just a lifestyle choice. It's a threat to a system dependent on expansion. Stability at the individual level conflicts with stability at the macro level. The most dangerous shift isn't anger, it's indifference. People aren't demanding reform, they're quietly recalibrating expectations downward. They stop believing promises, they stop planning long-term, they stop imagining improvement. They participate just enough to survive. That passive withdrawal is invisible in data but lethal over time. This is why nothing feels like it's healing. Healing would require contraction, resets, and honesty. Instead, the system chooses acceleration and distraction. More digital layers, more optimization, more noise. Anything to prevent stillness, because stillness leads to reflection, and reflection leads to refusal. The system understands something most people don't articulate yet. A population that fully understands the rules will stop playing. And that is the real reason nothing goes back. Not because it can't, but because if it did, the illusion would collapse. And the system knows it wouldn't survive what comes after.